Randos show is produced live in Sunroom Studios' Base Capsule and in partnership with KLST 103.5, RadioCallisti.org. Remember to catch our Exceptional Randos live stream on YouTube every Sunday between 2 and 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And if you have a story, idea, or question that you would like to share, we want to hear from you. Thanks for listening.
Wow, that was random. Exceptional Radio.
All right, it's the 6th of February. We are on the tail end of, I guess it was the first real winter storm we've had all winter. We had good 6-8 inches of snow. Some places probably a little more in others. I bet Indianapolis had 10 or 12 to 15 inches, I believe.
Massachusetts got a bomb cyclone, and we got 12 to 24 inches.
That's
the plows that plow the space behind where I live. See, my car is located at the end of the row of cars, and there's an island where all the plows plow the snow for all the contracts that they have with all of the landlords. So all the snow ends up getting piled essentially behind my car unless I go down and talk or haggle with the plow people themselves. And there was a 10-foot high pile of snow because they ended up using one of those smaller earth movers, bulldozers, to pile snow up. So there was half of that 10-foot high pile of snow directly blocking the car, and
bastards
had to shovel it out.
That's just bullshit. Fuck those guys. Oh my god. I got buried in one time. I owned a Subaru. I bought it explicitly because I was concerned about getting to and from work in the snow. And I'd parked on the side of the street just like I'd always parked, and there was a fantastic snowstorm, and I go out the next day and my car is completely surrounded by this 2-3 foot tall wall of snow. And so I tried to dig out, but I only got so far before I hit ice. And then I thought, well, maybe I can just drive onto the sidewalk. And for all of my attempts at very little gas and giving it the gas, I just kept hitting patches of ice. I couldn't even get on the side onto the curb, onto the sidewalk. There was just no way out. And so I call into work, and my employer's like, "What do you mean? Don't you have a Subaru?" And it's like, "Yeah, well, I can't get out of ice."
It's still limited by the laws of physics, man. I don't know what you want.
Yeah. But that being said, even the best 4-wheel drive system can't stop you. Once you hit ice, there's no amount of drivetrain that'll stop. You just gotta wait.
Right.
You just gotta wait.
Well, especially the ice that happened this past week was rain the night before as it was freezing.
Yep.
So it was an inch thick layer of ice underneath the snow. So it's the ice is one thing, but when ice that thick is covered by snow, it's not impossible to remove it, but it's really difficult if they didn't salt the night before. So that's where the roads end up. If they don't salt at the right time either, then it doesn't even matter. So it's
it'll just melt and then run off.
Yeah, exactly. So it's that's a very delicate thing when they're trying to conserve the salt, but then time it right so that it doesn't just, like you said, run off the road and then end up not helping anything.
Mass Department of Transportation said that they couldn't salt in advance of the last sort of ice storm that we had this past Friday because it was raining the whole time, and it would have just washed the salt off the street.
Yep.
That's exactly what happens, and that's why when it's raining as it's freezing, it's especially difficult because of that exact problem. So, there are things that people might say, oh, we could do this, or, you know, like there are heated roads in some places, but it's like that's not really sustainable for an entire city.
Well, I think New York is unique in that it has a lot of steam pipes through the roads still, and so there are places where it naturally just melts. But that's also an extremely old city. I'm pretty sure that most cities don't operate like that anymore.
It just makes me think of the roads that sing to you as you drive over them. Like imagine driving to work over that road every single day, and you're like having a shitty morning. You don't want to hear anything. The road starts singing to you. You know you can't stop it.
So there's actually a unique phenomenon with that, and it has to do with like vehicle speed. And when they're not going fast enough, they have to go fast enough for the pitches to align properly. And if they don't go fast enough, then all of the relative pitches are skewed, and they're not skewed at the same percentage. It's because it's a logarithm. And so if you're going too slow, not only is everything flat, but everything is like flat in a really dissonant way, like not musical at all. So you have to be going the absolute precise speed limit for those things to sound right. But it's cool.
Kind of like a record player, like a vinyl record player.
Yeah. Except I think it's like a combination of factors. Like there's like tire size, and it's a nice idea in theory, but it's the kind of thing that there are so many variables that could throw it all off. There's a really famous example where they do the what's that it's like the Lone Ranger theme or whatever. Maybe that's not the Lone Ranger theme. It's one of those chase things.
That's Rossini's Overture.
Okay. It's supposed to be that overture, but everything is off. Like it's flat, and it's also at the being it's designed for the wrong speed of road for the speed limit itself. Like sorry, I said that wrong. The speed limit for the road itself is too low to facilitate accurate playback of the grooves in the road through the tires. So there's all these factors about how to make it work right that it's easy to screw it up.
So like it wouldn't play the same for a sedan as it would for like a Silverado or something like that.
No, there's your tire size, your average speed, get two sets of tires hitting it at once, then you got this extra dissonant harmony thing going on because they're probably not playing the same pitch at the right times.
Well, this gets back to the notion that our culture treats music as this frivolous thing that is not necessarily meant to be it doesn't always have to be good. So it's like, oh, look at this. The tires can play this fucking stupid song and it's music. It's like, no, this is noise. This is like slightly organized noise unless you're going at the perfect speed. And then that's where it feels to me it's those types of it's not just that one thing, but when I see and experience things like that, it just makes me like
it cheapens the experience of actual
music. Does. And this is where the musical cartoon or any TV show that's not a musical show from the get-go that incorporates a musical episode cheapens music by proxy. And that's where I feel like it's that, I don't know if you guys have, well, you don't necessarily have watched them in a while, but the transition of music from the first Beverly Hills Cop to the third one, where like by the third one, it's that like over symphonic, like same melody, but there's
they've got like 100. They got the Los Angeles Philharmonic playing
right,
Axel
and there's
Foley's
like 102
theme.
pieces playing Axel Foley's theme. It's like, what are we doing here? What's going on? And this is like, what are we doing with music? And on the one hand, it's meant to romanticize and elevate the symphony to the high level. This is what the best like big budget film music should sound like, which is why we perpetually get that. And I think it just reinforces that cultural perception that the symphony is the highest culture concerning music, even though it's not even really relevant, because then when you realize like,
No, I think it's that
oh, this
the
Sorry,
music
go ahead.
that the symphony plays is the highest culture.
Mhm.
Like the music, not the symphony. The symphony
Right,
is just the
it's the
instrumentation.
piece.
So
It's the piece.
so when Goldie's Timeless gets played in Lord Albert Hall by London Philharmonic or whatever, that's actually a realization that drum and bass has landed. It's like fully recognized by the conservatory as electronic music, not just like this thing that people dance to for hours on end while chasing pills and ghosts in rooms eating cherries.
When Metallica had their compositions scored for a symphony, it's
Yeah, the
like,
San Francisco Philharmonic.
and it's like, obviously it's a completely different experience, but it's the piece that matters, not the
Yep.
symphony. So when that becomes like, oh, this is when they finally get recognized, it still reinforces that framework as if the symphony, like, you have to get recognized by the symphony to
Yeah.
become a legitimate musician.
Like you're not
And
a
that
piece of-
holds,
You're not like a legitimate part of pop culture until The Simpsons
Right.
create a character of you.
right, exactly. It's that same type of gatekeeping, but in that it's like the music conservatory holds classic symphonic structure at the highest, even though it's like the least relevant culturally, not because it's necessarily bad, but it's not our music. It's not relevant. And people who act like you need to let me think about this. If you're a specialist, you need to understand it, but a kid doesn't need to hear Beethoven. I'm sorry, they just don't. They don't need to hear Bach. They don't need to hear Mozart. They just don't. They don't need to hear that shit. They don't need to hear fucking Metallica either, just for them to be like, oh, they know about the history of music. They don't need to know that unless they're becoming an expert. So
I think everyone benefits from listening to Chopin, but only like, but not, they don't have, you don't have to go through like a guided study of it to appreciate Chopin. You can just be
Right, no,
exposed to it like in the car on the way to someplace or at a cafe as you walk by. That's sufficient.
but that's because his works still hold up
Yeah.
over time, and that's more of like, let's listen to this to understand like something written in the like 19th century still holds up today. So it's like, I can understand wanting to listen to it, but no kid still needs to hear it, like, unless they're becoming a pianist or becoming a musician and needing to learn theory. They just don't really necessarily, quote unquote, need to hear it understand
I've got a
why
perfect
they
example.
appreciate music.
I've got a perfect example of this. So I've got this book called The Guitar Gomorrah. It's actually it's a series of books. Scales, chords, rhythm patterns, exercises. These are tools to unlock the instrument itself. These are not books that you would give to like a beginner guitar player or even like an intermediate. These are fairly advanced, intended for guided study type literature. And within their pages, there is this one section that's dedicated to the Neapolitan scale. So this scale itself has its own set of rules, and it's similar to a few other scales or scale families. But the reality, and like you just pointed out, is nobody is studying Neapolitan opera because that culture doesn't really exist anymore. No one's making that music. That scale's not being used. So using it is kind of like a reference to this period of time when, there's these theoretical underpinnings of music existed, but they're not being used anymore. So it's like a music theory history thing. And so this is one section. It's like, I went over it and I worked on them and I tried to understand these transitions. And I got to this point where it's like, wait a second, I'm never going to play any of this music on the guitar ever. Holy crap, there's so many other things that I could be doing with this time instead of dedicating it to learning this dead scale. It's like a dead language. It's like trying to learn, uh, you know, Latin so I can go to a party and speak it with a bunch of other people. Well, that party doesn't exist.
I mean, okay, that's true, but if you like it, then do it. And this is the inherent problem of people needing time to enjoy things, but also needing to pay for roofs over their heads, because then you can't pursue that if you want to like it unless somebody else likes it so you can monetize it.
Yeah.
And this becomes the problem of like a self-fulfilling prophecy of what is popular being led by what people perceive to be profitable. Excuse me. And then by proxy, they end up going after things that don't necessarily represent their peak interest, but what they're told society will value the most long term so they can make money off of it. And this is where you have a bunch of people who never actually get time to do or pursue things that they want for themselves, mainly because then they're stuck in this cycle of like, oh, you need to be able to afford X amount of hours for your personal hobby by buying that after earning it from this system. And it's this like lie that people tell themselves instead of just going and doing the fucking hobby.
It's like a byproduct of capitalism in a huge way. You know, there's like the primary outcomes of living within a capitalistic society, and that's you have to pay for a roof over your head, you typically have to pay for food, and you typically have to pay for transportation. One way or the other, they're going to get you coming or going, either if it's provided publicly, even though the public system is going to be for profit, and or you're paying for a vehicle and you're in debt in order to pay for the vehicle. Unless you buy the vehicle right out with funds that you have amassed yourselves. And it's just a requirement of living in a capitalistic society. And then you're absolutely right. You end up renting time off in order to justify working hard. It's kind of like a self-fulfilling prophecy.
This is also, you know, what you just said is why I try to then get people to start taking their time back without feeling like they have to buy it back, because it's like if you try to buy it back, you'll never ever be able to get there because everyone's perpetually underpaid. And this is the issue where there's like a few people within every structure that aren't underpaid that then make everyone else feel like they can get out of that underpayment or underemployment time lease cycle. But working class never really gets in a position where they're actually able to earn their way out of it, which is why they do things like play the lottery or try to find places to invest so they can start making passive income as they're told, as a way to start getting more time for themselves, when that never actually happens, except for a few people that then get used as the tokens to make people keep chasing that dream. And I've seen, sorry, go ahead.
It's generational too.
Yep.
You know,
for sure.
Because you were talking about gatekeeping earlier in terms of the orchestra being a gatekeeper, and you know, in many ways, the highest patrons of the orchestra tend to be the gatekeepers culturally as well. The same thing goes for museums. As enjoyable as they may be, you know, in terms of spending time off, they still are gatekeeping institutions, and they tend to set the standards or try to set the standards by which things are considered relevant to the public. And in terms of, you know, being able to break the cycle of, you know, leasing time or trying to get out of the cycle of spending all of your resources trying to stop spending your resources, people are ultimately stuck in that cycle because they end up without, or they end up spending what it is that they have made, as, you know, meager as it may be compared to the leaders of the organizations that they're a part of, in order to somehow justify to themselves that they're doing well.
I don't think
That-
people. Sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, and that's an illusion that's perpetuated by the gatekeeping culture.
It is, and I don't think enough people have hit the ceiling of earnings that is actually, it's like an invisible ceiling until you get there, and then you're like, holy shit, I'll never become a millionaire, because once you hit like $200,000, the amount of taxes they take off is like, to actually amass $1 million, you'd have to earn like something like $3 million. It's something stupid. Like, so every time you start making like more than $250,000, you start getting like 60% taxes. God forbid you're working in two places. But like and I mean like a remote company that's in a different country or some shit, or like, you know, if it's in a different state, you're getting 2 state taxes in some cases. So it's like, or 2 municipal taxes in some cases. So the way that earnings actually are structured, and then you have to take into account your costs. So it's like people are like looking at somebody who makes $225,000 a year as if they're putting that money in the bank every year, when in fact a lot of times people will increase their costs incrementally with their pay. So if you don't make a large jump from like 10K to 80K, your costs are just going to incrementally keep going up. So by the time you're making 250K, your yearly expenses are like 200K or something, or maybe 225K or whatever it is after taxes, to the point where those people aren't actually putting a lot of money away in the bank. So it's like, even people who make $200,000 a year, because of the gradual curve at which they go along making it, they're not saving a ton. So the people who are actually sitting on a lot of money are like 3rd generation, like inheritances from people who were basically either robber barons or plantation owners who stole their labor in the first place, because no individual farm is really fucking that profitable. Like, farming is not profitable. It's not supposed to be something where you're like, oh, I go out and I have like a 3-acre farm and I'm making millions of dollars. Like, no, it's not, because of the way that the time that it costs to sustain it, not just the money, the time and the money and the work, labor hour, like the labor power. It's not something that is really that profitable, which is why our government has to fucking subsidize it, especially when you take into account unpredictable seasons, pests, fucking floods, all these things that can make farming, sometimes a season completely goes out of the window because a frost happens at a time it's not supposed to. And they make it seem like it's like a fucking factory, because that's the way it has to be in our minds in order for people to go to the store and be complicit with the like mass scale murder of animals that we deal with all the time. Because this is where, when you realize like how animals are murdered with impunity, it becomes like there are really like no consequences for animal murder, unless you're like in PETA's fucking targets. But that's where it's like, even then there's not a huge actual repercussion from that. So that's where I'm like, I'm not eating as much meat. So I'm like, you know, I grew up as an omnivore. So as I start to move, I've gone periods of vegetarian, but it's like, that's not to say anybody's without blame or like even the systems in which our food are grown have animals' death as a byproduct. The problem is the way that it's based in a Protestant animal as the beast of burden and humans as the controller or imperator of the land. that comes from that Protestant viewpoint, people will act like, oh, I'm not religious, but I'm a meat eater. Why are you meat eater? Because you're fucking grown up in this culture. And they don't want to acknowledge that shit. So it's like, on the one hand, people will act like they're not influenced by this culture or this indoctrination. But then on the other hand, like when I was in India, I can't tell you how many times I heard Western people talking about, oh, I just wish I could have a burger. Like in public, like that's not even, as if that's not offensive.
Blasphemous.
It's blasphemous. But you hear these people talking about, oh, I just wish I could have a fucking burger right now. I'm like, are you fucking serious? You're all the way over here. Why are you here if you're just going to complain about having a fucking burger? And that's where I'm like, it's this indoctrination that they don't even know they have, because then you see the destruction of the buffalo and what that was meant to do to the fucking people of the land, where they're like, we're actively destroying any sort of
connection.
Spiritual connection you're claiming to have with these animals, so then we can make this an industrialized process. So then in the future, there's no connection to the land, so then there's no consequences for fucking overkilling animals. It's like, we don't need to kill as many animals as we do every year, but then those people will point at the like the grasshopper and the ant fucking Aesop fable, not understanding that in the first place. It's like, no, the answer is not just killing a bunch of animals and freezing it. That's not what that story's meant to say. So it's like the people who are obsessively killing animals and using like what are claimed to be secular viewpoints that are rooted in Protestant human exceptionalism are the same ones that then turn around and then like defend cops murdering black people. It's the same fucking group. And that's where I'm like, I try to not eat meat as much as possible. Not just so I'm not a hypocrite, but because it's like, there's no fucking need to kill all these goddamn animals. Like, it's really like, it's insane how many fucking animals get killed every fucking day, where I'm like, hold up, what's going on here? Because we're not exceptionally fit people. So it's not like all this protein's being used to make like superhuman fucking Captain America, fucking Wonder Woman looking motherfuckers everywhere. If that was the case, I wouldn't say shit, but that's not the case at all. So all these people who talk about they need fucking meat every day, multiple times a day, for what? To sit on your fucking ass? Really? Is that? Because that's where I'm like, I think Americans just don't have enough exposure to good cooking of vegetables, and then they just justify their poor palates, or they rationalize their poor palates by saying they need the meat every day because it's really easy to cook meat and not have it just taste terrible. That's my hypothesis. But what do I know? I don't know.
Well,
I have no idea.
I think your point about just the process of industrial agriculture itself kills animals. Like we don't really talk or even think about snakes or rodents that live in the fields themselves that get tilled up and ground into the earth. And I'm sure it's on some level that's part of the process. That's probably why Farmer Bill's corn crop was better last year than Farmer Ted, because he ground up more gophers and fewer snakes. But there's definitely an animal loss of animal life that occurs with agriculture, with big agriculture, because they use chemicals too, and those things definitely have a broad impact, like downstream from wherever their drains drain into. I'm sure it's supposed to be regulated, but I get every sensation that despite regulations, it's just not enough. I mean, I'm sure that everyone's driven by some creek or some river or some pond or lake that looked like nothing lived in it because you could see it. Like no trees around it. That stuff actually scares the crap out of me.
So, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, just the idea that there are pools of liquid, standing liquid, all over the place that may contain chemicals that could, well, make you real sick, if not kill you.
And those are byproducts of the agricultural system as it's being implemented right now.
Yeah.
And, you know, there are some reports out there saying that global meat production is set to increase by nearly 40 megatons by 2029, reaching 366 megatons.
Where are they going to produce all this meat if we can barely keep the population of the earth fed?
The other question is the sustainability of that model.
How are they even going to deliver it if we can't even deliver all the food that we already produce?
Right. And the supply chain has been weakened considerably.
It's not that we can't, it's that it's not profitable. So that's why most of it gets thrown away. So this is the fucking inherent problem with then capitalism, that then they'll say, oh, we have a population problem and we need to make more people, when they're really just talking about the West, because there's no population problem on the continent of Africa or in fucking China. So it's like, or in India for that matter, like they're not having fucking population problem in India. So when they say that, they're actually talking about America and a specific demographic. So it's this bullshit framing, and then they'll point at the wealth inequality and the food inequality as a problem that needs to be solved, so that the fake population problem, well, it's not fake, it's the Western population problem that they're framing as a global one, can be solved, while then holding food basically ransom for these impoverished populations that they're then claiming are in trouble, but it's only because they're holding the food for ransom. That's the fucking inherent circle. The issue is then they're like, oh, if we just give these people food, they'll just start having babies out of control. But I thought you said there was a population problem. So it becomes like, once you realize that there's a fucking logical circle that they're doing this dance around, then when you unpack it, it doesn't hold up. And then you realize not only are they fucking lying about the population problem, they're the ones causing the fucking food poverty. They're the ones causing the like access poverty, because they stole the shit in the first place. And then they're trying to hang it over these people's heads as if like, oh, they need to do something to get out of this poverty. Well, just give them, like, stop stealing their shit. Then they won't be poor. First off, once you stop stealing their fucking shit and then saying, oh, they don't know what to do with it because they're not advanced enough. No, that's not fucking true. You just never gave them a chance because they just came in and started stealing the shit and then tried to use things like the modern thing that's happening with the like erasure of historical information that's relevant to anything that's like black specifically right now, is like what they did with the fucking colonial shit. So then you talk to Americans, they have no idea about colonialism and how far recently it went into like the 1900s. Like, people have no clue what the French were doing in America. If you ask the average American, when do you think colonialism in Africa stopped by the French? They'll be like, oh, 18 something, and not like 1960 something. So it's like, and there's places where you could even argue that it goes even later. But as far as like actual military like occupation for colonialism, Americans have no fucking idea how far into the 1900s that the French were doing it, because they're actively not taught that shit. It's like, I went through one of the best schools and I realized like the teachers that would even start to tell us remotely about the stuff that we're talking about right now, they would get lambasted by the fucking principal, because that's the reason we brought Rhett onto the fucking show, because Rhett was one of the teachers that dared to tell us the shit at the time, even remotely. So that's where I'm like, I want this dude to come on the show now because I understand what he was going through then because I was fucking there and I saw it. And I saw how the other parents reacted. I saw how the administration reacted. And I saw how there was just like 2 or 3 people who were willing to be like, yeah, I get that you're going to try to fucking get rid of me, but I'm still going to teach this shit anyway. But those people are in the minority. They're not the fucking like Michelle Pfeiffer, Dangerous Minds story. Like that shit is very uncommon. It's not the rule, it's the exception. And even further, those people often lose their jobs when they start to try to even remotely tell people the truth or tell children the truth about the people who are trying to hide the truth. And that's the issue, is like the people that will say the children don't need to learn about slavery because that's indoctrination, are using a different type of indoctrination that then makes it so people like Joe Rogan can go on fucking his podcast and say the N-word with the hard R as if that's the same as nigga. Like, those are not the same fucking words. So for him to be this person in a position of authority, like not authority, he's an informational authority to a lot of young people and a lot of baby men who never had a good fucking father figure. So he's this information authority. So when he's out here using the fucking N-word with the hard R trying to justify, I'm just using the proper context to explain the history of comedy, you don't need to be fucking telling that story because that's not your fucking story to tell, Joe Rogan.
I mean,
have somebody else on to tell it then. If you want to have that story, have somebody else on.
Well, historically, it's like his version is completely without context because one of them is derived from this Ethiopian word negus, which means king, and is known throughout
the Grand Negus.
The Grand Negus is the big head honcho, but the colonialists, they went into Ethiopia, they went into northern Africa, and they wouldn't say that word. They changed it. They came up with a different word that was pejorative and derogatory, but it wasn't even the right word. And so when that word comes to America without that history, without even the slightest reflection over the actual term Grand Negus, the king, like that just, it blows my mind that people will they'll don the cap of authority and try and explain something without the historical context. Like,
well, and that's where I started to realize, like, if you watch movies that are that use like African American vernacular English, the caption will have Nigger instead of nigga when black people don't call each other Nigger. We don't use that word for each other. No black person ever in the history of black people that wasn't working for fucking massa ever called another black person that word. So when you see, like, if you ever, like, I don't know if anybody's ever watching these types of movies, but again, it's like, if you watch it, they'll translate it or they'll caption it as if black people are out using the same word that the fucking KKK would use. And this is where when people like Joe Rogan are then using that word as if it's like the same, black people then don't even get to fucking articulate, hey, those aren't the same fucking words to us. Because further, he'll talk about the history of like Richard Pryor and all this shit and then misrepresent it because the whole reason Pryor was using it was to try to reclaim it. And people like Joe Rogan, they're not using the proper version of the word, misrepresent that fucking whole thing. So when black people change it, hey, nigga, what's up? What's up, my nigga? When we're saying that shit to each other, that's to say we're not using the other fucking word. So when white people try to act like, well, why do black people use that word in the rap songs? We're not saying that fucking word. We're not saying nigger. That's not the fucking word we're saying. Those are two fucking completely different words. And if anybody wants to act like they're the same, come talk to me. Because you need to understand there's a difference between R and A. First off, we're not in some fucking British, like, vernacular where we're just saying A and R are the same fucking letter. Now, no, Those are two completely separate words or letters. So if black people are saying nigga and then a white person saying this person said nigger, no, the fuck we didn't. We'll never call another black person that because it's a PTSD triggering word. Like that word alone triggers PTSD in black people in a way that if you don't have the genetic history of your people being lynched while that word is being hurled at them, you don't fucking know what that word does. You don't fucking know. So anybody speaking on that shit that doesn't have the genetic PTSD needs to shut the fuck up and let people like me talk about that word. That's all the fuck needs to happen. There's like the idea that anybody even wants. I don't want to say that fucking word. So Joe Rogan shouldn't be saying it 113 times. Nobody should want to say that word. I don't want to talk about that word, but we fucking have to because Joe Rogan keeps fucking using it. Joe Rogan keeps saying it as if it's not a fucking big deal, as if when people like me hear that shit, it doesn't trigger me and make me think about all this fucking negative shit that's associated with it so he can make some dumb fucking joke 113 times as if that's not some hacky shit that he'll then make fun of. Oh, you shouldn't say the same shit. Why are you going to the same fucking well 113 times, Joe Rogan? Wasn't once enough? Why is he repeating the same fucking material over and over just to be like, oh, because here's the problem. Now when you get all these fucking quote unquote leftists defending his use of the word because they did it too, what they're really defending, they just want to sing along to the fucking songs and say that shit in the club. That's all. That's all it is. I know what the fuck it is because I've walked up on a person singing the shit when he didn't know but anybody else was watching, and I'm like, oh, this is what it's about. This dude fucking sitting there at a fucking butcher shop singing along, like saying the N-word hard, and he's just dancing. And then he looked up and saw me, and I was like, this motherfucker was just doing this. And once he saw me, it's like he saw a ghost. He's like, oh God, a black person just saw me saying the N-word, singing along to the song. Because that's what it's all fucking about. They just want to sing along to the songs that we make to be like, oh, I can say this shit because I have power. Because that's what it comes down to. They want to have the power to say the word, but not get the fucking PTSD that's associated with it. Because that's why we don't say the fucking hard R. That's why we don't use that word. Because that's why my voice got, like, that word triggers something in black people, which is why they try to use it to invoke it, because they try to bring that shit out of us to then be like, look what it is. It's like they want to use that word to get black people pissed off, to then reinforce this narrative that somehow we're subhuman and can't control our fucking emotions. That's the problem, because they continue to fucking antagonize and continue to poke and poke and poke. Oh, look, he can't control his emotions, even though I've been calling him nigger his whole fucking life. This motherfucker is not supposed to say anything. He's not supposed to do anything. He's not supposed to fight back because he's black. Look, he's an angry black man. Look at him. I called him nigger 34,000 times in his entire life, but he's not supposed to do anything. He's not supposed to get mad. He's not supposed to get angry. He's not supposed to have fucking feelings because he's subhuman. So I can use the word nigger 34,000 goddamn times against this one fucking person as if Joe Rogan, like, as if him saying that shit isn't after a lifetime of us hearing that shit. People drive down the street and yell nigger fucking to make me feel other. That's how people use that word. So if you never had that shit happen to you and never felt like somebody in a car was gonna start shooting at you, don't even fucking talk about that word, because you have no idea what it's fucking like to hear that word. So that's why I'm like, Joe Rogan shouldn't even want to talk about that word. He shouldn't even want to talk about that word because of the history of it, because of what it does. So that's why I'm like, when I say it, it's because we need to have this fucking conversation so people stop doing this shit frivolously.
Yeah. You know, I think that's the problem. We've got these guys who are very, very prominent voices within the entertainment industry who are comfortable enough to say things and think they can walk it back. And, you know, I think the thing that blows my mind the most is Spotify's reaction is, oh, I think it's clear now that we have to do more to provide a more balanced platform. And so
They removed the episodes where he says it.
yeah, but they only removed 70 episodes, right? Something like
Yeah,
that.
they only removed specific
now.
episodes.
It's
Okay.
up to 113 now, and the count keeps going up. There's like an actual
People are going back through the episodes to scan the.
There's an API that scrapes the
audio.
former episodes listed to compare to the ones that are up now, and shows like a running tab of how many have taken down. Last night it was 113.
Well, 113 is a good start. That guy's been on the air for a long time, and so there have to be repercussions for this kind of thing. It's people who normal people, I think, in this country don't realize it when they wield a language of oppression, or that they are fluent in the language of oppression, and this includes racist vocabulary and racist ideas, and it's built into this country, and some people, I think a lot of people would like to avoid those things, but they just don't know how. I think these things require a level of consciousness that I think it's difficult for people who haven't spent their entire life moderating their tone or language to just pick it up and do it. It's like, adults aren't necessarily inclined to go back to the ground floor just so they can relearn how to adult again.
Well, and like you said, they haven't had to moderate themselves, because I realized like the white experience with cops is quintessentially different in that when a white person encounters a cop, the cop is trying to figure out like to help them get home, where when a black person encounters a cop, the cop is trying to stop them from getting home at like any fucking means necessary. And people can like argue with me on that, but they're fucking wrong. So it's like, I don't give a fuck what anybody wants to say about my explanation of that. That's how it is. Like, you can go back and look at fucking Opie Taylor and look at the Andy Griffith show and look at how the cops used, like, somebody was a white person drunk. Oh, let me follow you home, sir. Let me make sure you get home and make sure you get bed into your wife. I don't want to have to take you down to the station. I'll just follow you home. That whole like make sure white people get home to their fucking family is like, it's what the cops do. And then harassing people of color or people they think are helping people of color is also what cops do. Especially if they're black, because the black ones are trying to just fit in with the white ones, not knowing that the white ones will then come in and bring them a cake that says nigger on it, like you saw last year with that fucking black cop that finally had to file a lawsuit, because the cops don't give a fuck about him. They'll just use him to harass black people and be like, oh, no, look, we employ them too. Underpaying the motherfucker the whole time. And he's not saying anything because he just wants to impress his white friends. And it's like, you see, there's like it don't happen in just black people. There's like self-hating people of every ethnic origin. And it's funny, like when white people are self-hating, a lot of times they'll end up gravitating towards minorities, and like the minorities will accept them with open arms, because it's like, you'll see the people that are like, I don't even like white people that are like white. And then you're like, I can't really like hate on this person for like having this perspective. So then you're like, okay, you might as well come hang out at the fucking picnic. And it's like, you see this perpetually where it happens the other way around too, where black people will be like, oh, I don't like black people. And then the police force will hire them, but they'll only use them as a fucking puppet. And it's like not the same sort of absorption into the community as like when white people cross into like communities of color. Because I've seen it happen where it's not just black people either. It's like you know, you go to a reservation, there's white people there too, and they're native, but they're just white native. And it's like, they're not ostracized for being white. They're part of the group, and they have a lot of the same perspectives as the dark-skinned natives on the reservation. So it's like, they're the same. The racial groups are that fluid, which is why they're ridiculous in the first place. So that's kind of where it's like on people to understand that these racial constructs were never based in anything scientific. And it was always like a feudalist class structure. So if you can't learn that history, then you can't understand why there's white natives on the reservation who get treated no different by the other dark-skinned natives on the reservation. And that's where I'm like, you got to go to a res to understand that, though. You're not going to be able to get that shit from like watching Reservation Dogs. You can't just consume media and glean that shit. You have to understand. Like, and that's one of the problems with Americans. They just don't travel outside their circles because they're made to think, oh, if I listen to fucking Joe Rogan, that's like me going to Texas and hanging out with him. No, it's not. It's passive consumption that's meant to make a person feel like they're participating. And that's what the trick of these podcasts becomes, is like,
I'm pretty sure Joe Rogan lives in Joe Rogan Land. Like, he might physically be located in Texas right now, but you know, his reality is Joe Rogan Land. It could be in California, it could be in Ottawa, it could be in Manitoba, it could be in Costa Rica, it could be anywhere, but it's always going to be Joe Rogan Land. It's like a really strange place that, well, you know, a lot of people seem to want to be there. But it also seems like the rules are all skewed.
You know who's living in a world where the rules are all skewed? Jeff Bezos is living in a world where the rules are all skewed. He wants to dismantle a bridge in the Netherlands so his super yacht can make it out.
I thought they were already going to go. Like, I thought they were planning to, or maybe I just misread it. But yeah, those people. Well, and it's funny, like, okay, as you're saying, there are this group of people that exist seemingly on this like level where regular people can't even fathom what it's like to be them. Like Joe Rogan basically gets paid to sit around and ask dumb fucking questions. And the regular person can't even fathom what it's like to be paid $100 million. Like, oh my God, it must be amazing for like this dude who didn't graduate college to be undermining academia and undermining the system. And like people who don't want to go learn anything can have Joe Rogan in their heads as like the success story of like just pure gumption and skepticism that turned out into like $100 million. Like, I don't know, step 1, question. Step 2, question mark. Step 3, $100 million. And it's like the way Joe Rogan got popular from the podcast that he had, where he used to be like Duncan Trussell on there most of the time talking about DMT and fucking other realities, and like then transitioning into selling Alpha Brain and fucking Aubrey Marcus, and then they're going ayahuasca retreats, and then into the Graham Hancock like ancient alien theory, and then eventually into the full-on right-wing like Alex Jones, Milo Yiannopoulos, Jordan Peterson. He's transitioned from effectively representing himself as left spiritualist into, I'm not going to say he's a skinhead, but he's about as close as you can be to being a skinhead without openly just giving the Zig Heil salute. And that's where I'm like, I was on his forums when
they started dissolving and deteriorating.
Oh yeah, it started. But there was one point he had to put up a sticky note that was like, no more racist shit, because I feel like he started to realize he was getting big enough that the shit would come back on him. And it was like he was trying to rein in his forum that had basically become the haven for Stormfront. But then by then it was too late. So he ended up just having to shut the whole thing down, and deleted it, tried to wash it as if there's like a whole copy of the forum out there somewhere. I know somebody had downloaded it basically and archived it. But there's some fucked up shit on his forum where it's like if his forum had stayed up, people would realize that he is the person that he's being accused of being, and if not worse. I think he's worse. But because he's done a decent job of scrubbing all of the a lot of the evidence, the stuff that still exists isn't as bad as the shit that's on the forum. Because then it's like, whew, some of the stuff that he would post under his own account, and you know it was him, super questionable concerning like the racism, because that's where when you get too tied into the ancient alien stuff, that takes you down a racist route, whether you know it or not. And he was very heavily into the ancient alien stuff. So it became this thing of like getting into the, what's his name? Dennis, not Dennis Leary. I can't, Dennis McKenna or Terrence McKenna. Because his brother's Dennis. When he went into the Terrence McKenna stuff and the Stoned Ape theory, at first, it was like, it seems innocuous, but then you would read the stuff he was writing on the forum and you're like, oh shit, he's definitely comparing black people to like apes. And basically these like mindless ape-like creatures that then were given sentience by the gods, which in a lot of cases end up just being white people in these recountings, because it's like he was also into David Icke, and David Icke was very anti-Semitic to the point where David Icke's whole lizard thing was like basically him using that as a metaphor, a thinly couched metaphor for Jewish people, where then you're like, oh shit, oh fuck, that's what he's saying. Like, because I was like, I wasn't even into David Icke so much as like, I like to read what's out there and see what people are saying. And when you read David Icke, you're like, oh, this is kind of weird. But I could see like where he's coming from in the sense of like in a very sci-fi alternate history, very unlikely kind of way. Like, I guess. But then you realize he's just actually talking about Jewish people. And then you're like, oh, fuck, this is the same shit from the Nazis where they just use these like thinly veiled metaphors when they're talking about specific races. And then once you realize what they're doing, it's like, oh, you can't unsee that shit. David Icke was never actually talking about lizards. He was always talking about Jewish people. And the people who were like trying to make it seem like he was serious about the lizard stuff was just protecting the anti-Semitism. And that's when you see it. And that's where I'm like, Joe Rogan, I don't know if he was always racist, but he let the ancient alien stuff
of that apple. He ate enough slices of that pie.
Because then you realize how often Ancient Aliens, the TV show, would reference Nazism and not speak negatively of it. Nazis should never be referred to in a positive light. If you ever listen to Ancient Aliens, like at least half, if not most of the time they're referring to him, it's not negatively. And you're like, hold on. Are we like praising Nazis right now? Are we like talking about Nazi ingenuity? What's going on here? What's going on?
Isn't that like the basis of the History Channel?
But I think some people are more aware of it than others. But when you realize how rooted it is in ancient alien theory, like, and how often it happens over the courses of the seasons, then it's like, hold on, what's actually going on here? Because you guys are talking way too nicely about Nazis way too often for my taste. So then I mean, once I realized that, I would keep hate watching it And then I'm realizing like, oh, these people have no fucking clue what they're talking about. And they're just saying a bunch of nonsense that looks legitimate if you're a fucking moron. And that's where I'm like, I watched probably probably more like 9 seasons of Ancient Aliens, just hate watching it and just like stank face the whole time, but enjoying picking it apart because then I can go look at these dumb people on the Rogan forum and like immediately deconstruct the argument because I know where it's coming from. That's why I do that shit. It's not because I hate myself or want to subject myself to these things. It's more so if you can find the source of the poor logic, you can deconstruct it at the source rather than trying to be like every single argument with somebody who believes in ancient aliens is really difficult to have unless you understand how they construct the nonsensical frameworks of like being like Peru, 1969, and then going to Göbekli Tepe, 1858, and then they'll just string together these events loosely as if these things somehow connect, and the uninformed idiotic person will look at them and connect them in their own mind when in actuality there was nothing connecting those events at all. And once you see that, it's really easy to look at ancient aliens and be like, oh my God, this is fucking complete nonsense. But until you like see their logical framework or their illogical framework and how they like will throw out a location, a date, and then go into the event and then do that again in a series as if those events somehow connect without actually establishing a reason they connect, the idiot connects those things in their mind. And that's what Ancient Aliens does every fucking episode.
Machu Picchu, 1612. Botswana,
Yes,
1583. Tanzania, 12 AD. These
And if you
places
say
are
it-
all on Earth.
If you say it with that voice, Americans just eat that shit up to like, oh shit, this must connect to what he said the other time with that voice. And it's like this conditioning that I understand media enough to understand when conditioning's happening. And it's like that approach to setting up information is not only not innocuous, but that's exactly how Ancient Aliens establishes a means of connecting things that aren't actually connected.
You know, shows like Ancient Aliens, their connections between episodes are nebulous at best. There's no continuity. It's all just formulaic. So they're just throwing facts out with pizzazz and an expectation that people will just absorb it by osmosis.
They also tend to repeat a lot. I think the first time I tried to watch a season of Ancient Aliens, I was like 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 episodes in, and I kept feeling like they were saying the same thing but in a different sequence. Like the sequence where Geo is talking about something and he does the thing with his hair. Like in one sequence, he's got orange skin and his hair's big, but in the next few images, the hair gets bigger and he gets more and more tan. But then the fourth image of him, he's less tan and his hair is more subdued. And so I think at some point they're just drawing on stock footage of him saying things and just stringing it together in a way that kind of makes sense.
What if he's like Polka Dot Man and he like takes on physical characteristics, and then he has to expel some sort of orange substance from his body in order to return back to normal?
I don't think there's enough turmeric in the world to make him look like that. I think it's got to be some kind of radiation exposure. It has to be radiation. There's no explanation.
And where does the radiation come from? Ancient Aliens?
Well, of course. The Ancient Aliens are powering him with their ancient space radiation. It's being channeled through the pyramids, of course.
He gets it from Noah's Ark. He found Noah's Ark.
Noah's
and
Ark is just
the
another.
space.
Noah's Ark is just another name for one of the ships at the pyramid spaceport.
Exactly.
Mount Ararat was just like a part of the spoke system of the pyramid hub network.
Yeah, Mount Ararat's just a pyramid.
It's a refueling station.
Yeah, because I'm not. The fact that humans exist makes it likely to me that intelligence exists somewhere else in the universe. That's not even out. Like, I completely don't discount that at all. And in fact, I think like humans are proof of it. The issue is space is fucking gigantic. It's really fucking big. So there's like not actually a whole lot of reasons for anyone to come here. Mainly because if like, okay, here's another thing. If radio frequencies had been bouncing around that were powerful enough to be broadcast, they would still be bouncing around in our atmosphere. So there's like a bunch of shit where we would be able to like pick up, like, let's say they had figured out broadcast radio 8,000 years ago, and they made signals strong enough for those signals to go
Travel
far enough for
years. That's not far enough to get anywhere.
Right. I mean, okay, let's say 200,000 years for those signals to eventually get somewhere for an alien species to fucking pick them up and then come here. Well, there would be some remnants of those because they were powerful enough to keep going that far, and our atmosphere bounces shit around, and it would definitely not be coming from one location if they were that powerful. So there's all these things about the way that if the energy was powerful enough to go that far, then it would still have some sort of trace.
Yeah. Well, we know
that we would be able to pick up on, and we're not picking that up.
We know now.
So there's no reason. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, we know now that a lot of those reoccurring pulses are magnetars and neutron stars and pulsars and quasars just doing their thing. And for any source to generate enough energy to create a radio signal powerful enough to travel, from one galaxy to another, or just within our own galaxy, they've got to be a quasar or a pulsar or a magnetar or a neutron star. They've got to be a black hole. And so now we're talking about Kardashev level 4 civilization that's mastered the power of the ability to take power from black holes from the entire galaxy that they live in. Holy shit.
They're not coming to us.
They're not coming to us.
You know what I mean? They don't need us. They don't need us to work for them. They've mastered the universe at such a level that they don't even need to acknowledge us as existing. So this whole notion that they'd come here to steal our gold or steal our resources.
They're here to steal our women.
Right. It's a very military industrial complex that comes from the lack of understanding that we are still a type 0 civilization. So yeah, we're going to fight over fucking resources, but they don't do that shit anymore. That's exactly why they're type 4 civilization. Well, but people don't understand the Kardashev scale. So
like the idea that we could even identify a extra or a intragalactic civilization and communicate with them or even plan to go visit them. By the time we get 100,000 light years away from here, 100,000 years have passed. I mean, if humanity exists in 100,000 years, cool. But I get the impression that that's highly unlikely. I mean, humans might still be alive, but not in our current state. Not with our current...
Yeah, capitalism's not sustainable for that long. And that's kind of where we're seeing it fall apart already. So it's like, what is it? It has got like a...
We're what, 2,000 something years?
2,000, yeah, 2,000 year limit on it as a system. So I'm like,
I mean, the Chinese are into what, year 4,000, and they went into socialism like about 100 years ago. So there's like a,
but it's more statism than like socialism as imagined, and that's kind of where they have more socialist government practices that are policies that are put in place to preserve the longevity of the state, but that does not necessarily preserve the individual. And that's kind of where it's like, that's why it's more statism than socialism as imagined. But it also is why they do capitalism better as a government than ours, because socialism was really just an evolution of capitalism to be more efficient with capital at the state ownership level, but also having vested direction and interest control by the workers at some level of production, not all means of production. And that's kind of where like Marxist communism is where people have moved, well, individuals within governmental structures move to seize all forms of production under the control of government, which is not even necessarily meant to be communism as imagined. So that's where when people talk about Marxism, a lot of times they're talking about, that's when they mean a government that's going to come in and seize all private industry control and like be the ones that are like in control of all the production now, because of the way that governments have done that in the past and misapplied and misunderstood Marxist theories, which is where like
that's a nationalization is not necessarily a tenet of socialism.
Exactly. And that's where it never necessarily was in the construction, but in the application, the ones that overextended it's the same thing in America, where governments are meant to create legislation and policies that impact and influence the people, not directly control them, if it's meant to be a democratic government. And this is where when you get monarchies or oligarchies or despotic rule, that's the issue, is the government stops acting in the best interest of the individuals or the citizens. And that's kind of where, like, because China has some questionable shit, it's clear that they're not acting 100% ethically. It's more so a question of, as a governmental entity, where does their responsibility stop and start for the individual? Because in some cases they overstep these bounds, and in some cases they understep these bounds to, in many places, leave people to fend for themselves, and in certain places people are overregulated. And that's where it's same shit in America. But I don't understand Chinese culture enough in modern times, where in America I can point at fucking Ronald Reagan and be like, this is where government started acting like it was the church's responsibility to take care of poor people, and government stopped taking responsibility for poverty directly. And then effectively Bill Clinton starts to try to bring it back around. So there's these points where I know, because of my experience within this country, I can point to them and be like, this is where our government stopped taking responsibility for poor people, and this is where they started to try to pick it back up, but didn't do a very good job. I don't know those intricacies about China to speak on that shit, so I generally don't. I mean, in the sense of like, I don't talk about those things as if I know them, but there's times when I'm like referencing China, but it's more so in the like grand history, because I actually know more about that than I don't know anything about living in China. So I'd never actually try to make it seem like I knew anything about that. I just know my understanding of Chinese history from what I've learned, and then have been able to sort of glean from that why the government appears to be one way when our government's saying they're communist or socialist or whatever. But then you talk to a Chinese person and it's like, they're capitalist as fuck. So
Yeah.
it's like you're two completely different things.
They're like it's. I think you kind of said it very accurately. They are socialist in a number of policies, and that are designed to reinforce the state and protect the state. But a lot of those policies also they protect the people because the people are the state. If you talk to people, Chinese people, I think, at least the ones that I've spoken to online, they identify themselves with China. The Chinese people are China, and so like there's confusion. Well, there is apparent confusion, at least on my end, about this whole like people say, oh yeah, they don't like China, but they love the Chinese people, and so there's this weird disconnect of, well, China is the Chinese people. The civilian government's in charge. They're running things the way the people of China want to run things. Isn't that what we want here?
I mean, I would assume so, but I don't know
Like,
if that's actually true, because then you hear about like the notion that it's kind of a similar oligarchic structure as Russia, which I don't know how true that is. Like, I can only assume the oligarchy in Russia is true just because I've sort of seen how businesses operate, and they sort of are beholden to the structure.
I'm pretty sure that the crazy rich Chinese people go to Singapore. Singapore is like ultra wealthy China or ultra wealthy Asia. It's one of those places where the people that work in Singapore typically don't even live there.
Mm.
And so, I mean, Singapore is a really advanced place. They've got incredible architecture. It's probably one of the most technologically sophisticated places on Earth. They are very willing to pay for talent and technology. And, I mean, they seem to be doing something right because it's a very affluent society.
Yeah.
Although,
I do recall a lot of Singaporean blockchain professors, and they were doing a lot of shit like early on.
yeah.
So,
And it's a pretty interesting place as far as what I've read. Pretty strict with some of the rules, but they uphold high standards. I think what you were describing earlier, it made me consider, like, is there an Overton window but for ethics? Like, are we just sitting too far into a section of this Overton window where it's like it's everything, not everything, where some things are cross ethical thresholds more easily? And are there some people who exist where they're more flexible or willing to let things slide, and as a result of it, it it, it alters the balance of what is ethical or what is not, and is our perception of what is ethical itself, is that the thing that is driving the behavior? Is that why there's so much apathy or even avarice towards people? Like, when people are getting shot still, like the guy in Minneapolis who got shot he was asleep on his couch or something. They bust in and shoot his ass. Another no-knock warrant demonstrating that it's a very horrible policy. But do people have enough energy to care right now because of pandemic drains?
I mean, there was a demonstration of hundreds of people after that event, and the system was typically, as it's been, reactionary. It hasn't been very proactive in terms of trying to affect policies like that before these types of things happen to people that they don't deserve to happen to.
Well, I know, but is there like no dialogue because people just don't care? Is that really where we are? Is that how far that ethical window has opened up?
I think the ethical window is open. I think people have to be forced to talk about it in some way. They need to be confronted with the reality, and they have to understand what it means. That there needs to be some collective empathy, because people are very distracted, and they tend to get very distracted.
Well, I was kind of like set off this morning because I saw there was like this notion about to catch wave that people should stop being concerned about Joe Rogan saying the N-word and start worrying about Ukraine and like it's like as if people can't be concerned about more than one thing at a time.
I know,
But
that's so insulting.
It is super insulting, but it immediately is like a move to dismiss Black people's grievances. And this is how we end up in 2022 with structural racism not going anywhere. Because every time we're like, hey, this person's been pretending that he wasn't racist and said the N-word on record like a bunch of times. We don't give a fuck what the context is because most of the time Black people weren't around. So you know he wasn't trying to make it a real conversation about race. So that's when people are like defending it. It's just yet again an attempt to make Black people not able to air grievances and then make it seem like we're the ones being irrational because we need to be worried about Ukraine, as if Black people fucking are the ones that started the fucking shit in the first place. Like, we didn't make Putin build up his goddamn military on the border. What the fuck are we supposed to do with goddamn Joe Biden now? Like, what, you think Joe Biden's gonna call up his Black caucus and be like, hey, we got this situation in Ukraine. Hey guys, what can we do to solve the Putin problem? The fuck are Black people gonna, you know what I'm saying? So it's this weird, illogical jump to then be like, hey, Black people who are concerned with Joe Rogan saying the N-word, why aren't you doing anything about Ukraine? The fuck are we supposed to do? What, like, I mean, realistically, because my thing is like, I don't want fucking Putin invading Ukraine, but I don't want more US soldiers going anywhere either. So it's like, I don't think sanctions are a solution. Sanctions don't work, but sending more troops doesn't fucking work either. That shit never works. It just escalates shit. So I'm like, I don't know if it's time for the United States to try to work with China and be like, hey, China, why don't we try to get Russia to stop the bullshit and make this a fucking unity moment where we're like, hey, I know we've talked a lot of shit about Chinese government in the past. I'm sorry for that. But Putin's about to wild out in Ukraine. Why don't we do some shit together and make the world see that America and China aren't really enemies? Well, to me, that is the most logical fucking solution right now, not sending goddamn guns.
In the wake of Cheeto Mussolini, obviously U.S.-Chinese relations have been a little strained. But I think it was like a few days ago, there was some, like Putin and Xi Jinping had a little talk, and they came to some kind of agreement about things, about how to handle this situation. So I think he beat us to it.
Once again, just because he's always at least 3 steps ahead of our government, which is unfortunate. And that's where I'm like,
even if things were good between the United States and China, like on a real level, not a trade level, but like on a strategic level kind of thing. Even if they're good, like China does what they need to do anyways. They're doing their thing. I think the problem is that, Russia is basically a gas station with a giant military, and they've got contracts with people all over Europe. And those people in Europe, they want to renegotiate because obviously they want to renegotiate. They got elected on the promise that they were going to get a better energy deal from Russia. And, it sucks, but maybe that those nuclear reactors in France are going to pay off, or maybe Germany's solar field is going to finally return the promise of, supplying all the energy that they need. Or maybe who's the other? There's another country that made some bit bold energy claim recently, I think. Oh, maybe not. But obviously we're at this very unstable point where, some people are trying to find a way to get off of the Russian gas, and it's causing problems elsewhere. You know, if France doesn't need Russian gas, then somebody else is going to have to help cover the cost of refining and transportation, and that's going to get foisted on the rest of the European Union countries that are EU members who have energy contracts with Russia. So maybe they should be less pissed off at Russia and more pissed off at Germany and France for upending the stability of their agreement. I don't know. I'm just throwing words out now. It's just really complicated. It's the kind of thing that makes me wonder, it's like, why the hell are we even involved?
Is they're NATO allies, and
yeah.
and there are like longstanding agreements. I mean, Joe Biden said that the articles binding the NATO countries together are sacred. So he's basically
oh shit! Now
doing
they're
this
sacred.
Yeah, he's doing this as a gesture to the NATO countries. Essentially, that's why he's sending troops. Because Ukraine isn't a NATO country.
No, they're what is it? There's something about Warsaw Pact countries, and like Russia was like, yeah, we'll let this slide as long as these things never happen. Is Ukraine trying to get into the EU, or are they trying to join NATO or whatever? The United Nations NATO Corps, whatever crap that they do, peacekeeping.
I don't know if Ukraine is part of the EU. Let me look it up. They have a Ukraine-European Union Association Agreement.
Huh. Okay, so they're like it's like a dog leg agreement. I wonder, does this is like if part of Canada decided to leave Canada, and then Canada's decided to bolster troops along that border? Is that what's happening basically? Or if like Texas left the United States and then we started putting troops along the Texas border, is that is that analogous, or am I just wrong?
I mean, Ukraine was an independent country.
Well, but they were part of the USSR.
Right. Oh, I see.
This isn't the USSR, so it's like, but it's not. So then it's like nothing like that at all in the sense of like, it would be like when Texas tried to secede before the Civil War, or I guess, yeah, before the Civil War. So then they would not have been seceding from the post-Civil War Union. They would have been seceding from the pre-Civil War South, which is not the same entity. Like, and that's where it's like, it's like a reductionist to conflate Russia and the USSR, in that the USSR had a very specific tenet that the Russian government doesn't have at all, which is where, regardless of whether they actually adhere to that or not, it's like they have completely different ideals and goals as an organization. And that's kind of where
I see.
It's like, I think because Putin was like part of the USSR fucking secret police or whatever, I forget the name of them.
The GRU.
Yeah, because he was part of that, it's like very easy for the American government to then conflate them as if his interests are connected to that, as if those are the same interests that are guiding his dictatorship over Russia. So it's like it's a completely different type of dictatorship under a completely different set of tenets. Make no mistake, it's definitely and most certainly a dictatorship that's despotic and rotten from its very core. But
So do you think he has more?
It
in
has
common with,
nothing
like,
to.
old school Russian czars than the
Yes.
communist leaders?
Yes, exactly. And that is more of the oligarchy that he represents, because then they are extremely capitalist and extremely greedy and wealth oriented. So there's not this actual they're not communist at all. So for them to be conflated with the USSR is once again basically falling into like US propaganda that Russia is always this communist threat, when if in reality, as you're saying with their oil, they're capitalist as fuck. They're capitalist as fuck right now. They're hyper capitalist, if anything. And the extreme wealth inequality is just as bad there as it is here. So their people are like, their actual people are hostage in the same way that Americans are hostage. But then our government makes it seem like their people are fucking mindless robots that are like fighting for the state. And it's like, they do the same shit with China. So it becomes this propaganda machine that makes it really easy for Americans to fall into this mindset of what Americans are being told, rather than actually understanding the nuances of what it's like to be either a Russian or Chinese citizen that's not actually in support of the government, but is not against the notion of supporting their nation state and that nationality that many of them hold dear, because that's part of their identity. And it's like, you're asking people to reject their identity as this nation, or as being part of this nation state, to condemn individual despots, which is unrealistic to be asked of anyone, because Americans won't do it. So why would fucking Chinese people or Russian people do it if Americans won't do it? Because if you like push an American on imperialism, it's not really an imperialist country. We've done some bad stuff in the past, and Americans will fight you. They'll fight you tooth and nail on, like, I'm talking about like a left person, not like a right-wing open person who actually doesn't give a fuck about fascism. They really could care less if fascism was instituted. So like, yeah, those people, they're not gonna, like, of course they're gonna endorse imperialism, but there's people on the left, we're not that imperialist. So
I think it's okay to admit that we live in a country that has imperialist foundations. I think it's okay to acknowledge that. It's probably the first step in healing. Like, we have to admit that there are skeletons in this country's closet before we can, renovate the closet.
yeah, definitely a skeleton-filled closet, to say the least. And that's kind of where
That was my attempt at being really diplomatic about describing it.
right.
Like,
Well, I mean, I feel like, you've seen Poltergeist, right? I'm assuming you've seen Poltergeist. It's like, people saw Poltergeist and didn't get the fucking point. It's like they just saw a horror movie but didn't understand
why?
Because they didn't show all of the natives dying. It's like a lot of people just that was lost on them altogether as to what caused the energy to emerge. It's like they don't want to understand it, or it just needs to be spelled out for them, because they've never actually had to suffer or empathize with suffering at that scale, because they are not from a group that has been subjected like that.
Man, now I want to watch Poltergeist. It's been so long.
It's good. It says a whole lot, and that's where
Don't go into the light.
And they made a bunch of those movies too.
They did, and then it getting turned into like a franchise. It's there. It's there in the story, but it's like the people who consumed it just ignored it. They just completely overlooked it.
I think that's the goldfish crowd that's attracted to bright flashing lights. Because I remember there's a lot of strobe light activity in that movie. It was like a really like they were applying it as a technique more than just as, oh yeah, this is going to happen kind of thing. Like they really pushed that whole strobing effect.
Yeah. Which, I don't know, man. It's like
TV, I mean, CRT televisions can do that, but they really usually don't. Even when there's like huge static on them, you got to like feed them a special signal to make them strobe like that. I think they've got to send a signal that's like matches the frame rate of the film. Otherwise, it won't matter. It'll just be either off or on, and it'll be tied directly to the film.
Yeah. Yeah, that's what happens with
because if it happens more than once every frame, it's either going to be one or the other. It's not going to be two. It's not going to have the frame can only capture one slice at a time.
Yeah.
And of course now we've got like 60 and 120 and 240 hertz monitors, and there's content that'll take advantage of that frame rate so you don't get smearing. And I'm just talking about like live television, like automotive racing or athletics, because it's actually kind of cool to see a ball bouncing that doesn't look like a smear. Yeah. Although I do miss the early days of flat panel televisions when somebody would throw a basketball and you'd see this kind of orange arcing thing tracing across the screen. Mm-hmm. That was actually really cool. And it was like the only time in my life that I ever remember watching hockey and being able to tell where the puck was, because you'd see this weird gray streak on the screen.
Well, they added it when we were young, like hockey specifically.
Well, yeah, I remember they put that stuff inside the puck so they could they could draw it on the screen, but.
Well, and that's where that happened right around the time when we were.
Well, I was in the 8th grade when they introduced that. I remember very clearly. I had a social studies teacher who was, or 7th grade. He was really into the Detroit Red Wings, and then this guy who played on their team, Teemu Solani. I know this name because he talked about that guy like every other day in class, and that's all I know. He had an interesting name. He's Norwegian, and he's a hockey player. But I remember he was talking about this technology. He's like, it's so great, you can finally see the puck. I was like, wow.
Yeah. Because it would activate blue if it was going 30 miles an hour, and it would turn red if it hit above 90.
Yep.
And it's like they did that right before the big strike.
Yeah.
Or it was a lockout, not a strike. I'm sorry. So they had like, I think it was like 6 years or something. Maybe it may even been longer than that. I forget exactly how long it was, but there was like no professional hockey for fucking years. And it just killed all that enthusiasm that had been built up into the 90s. Cause it was like everybody had their hockey team going into that period. Well, not everybody. A lot of people had hockey teams in the sense of like, you'd be either like a Los Angeles Kings fan or Chicago Blackhawks or Red Wings or the St. Louis Blues were a big one. There were like a few teams that nationally people got a lot of support for them because this was like right after Wayne Gretzky was big. And for whatever reason, like Americans loved Wayne Gretzky. And it was like from like 1988 to I want to say 96. Wayne Gretzky was like the fucking king. It was him and Michael Jordan. And then
Joe Montana.
Like Joe Montana, Andre Agassi, and then briefly like Dan Marino like rose and fell real fast. Like
you just rattled off like the best of Wheaties boxes.
Well, I feel like people forget he was in Ace Ventura,
Yeah.
which didn't age well.
Oh man,
But it's
dude, there's so many Jim Carrey movies that when I watch him now and I try to enjoy it, and then he says something that's just like, this motherfucker would have been burned alive now if he'd have said this shit.
yeah,
Like, lucky he made these movies like in the 90s.
yeah, yeah, it's real bad. Because then it was like, I mean, even like Jose Canseco when he was in Madonna's video and they were dating, and like Dennis Rodman, there was like this weird period where a bunch of like athletes were elevated to superstar status, and then it just, as quick as it happened, it was over because they were all too like drug oriented to keep that shit up. Like Lawrence Taylor was in Any Given Sunday? No, The Program. He might have been in both of them. I think he might have been in both of them actually. But Lawrence Taylor had a brief movie career, and it was like all of these people were like thrust. Because yeah, Shaq was in Blue Chips. I feel like people forget how Shaq was like.
Wait, he was in a movie where he played himself, right? That's
Basically,
what about.
Yeah, that was how he basically got into acting in the first place, was just by playing himself.
That's like that's the 8 Mile model too, right?
Yeah,
Shaq play a genie.
No, that was Sinbad.
Yeah, no, it was Shaq. Everybody misremembers it as Sinbad, but it was actually Shaq. So there's like a skit that Sinbad did, and then everybody fucking Mandela affects Sinbad back into the Shaq movie. And then Sinbad will be like, I wasn't in no fucking genie movie.
Oh, I love that story.
Because then Sinbad pops up on Always Sunny, and he's like, you never find out if he's like real or if he's a figment of Dennis's imagination. Because he kidnaps Dennis, I think, a couple of times with fucking Mark Ronson from Matchbox 20. Is that the guy's name? I forget the guy's name, but it's like the lead singer from Matchbox 20, and you're like, what the fuck? This is the most random shit ever, and that's why you never really find out if it was Dennis hallucinating this shit or not, or if like Sinbad and Mark Ronson were actually there in like hospital gowns. Yeah, it was like, I haven't seen that episode in a long time, but I thought it was a couple, like I said, but Sinbad is there was a period when he was on top of the world and had a fucking sitcom and was making movies and shit. Like it's real hard to remember that, or when Martin Lawrence was like the leading man. Yeah, movie got real weird. Like, you guys remember Blank Check?
Yeah, and Richie Rich.
Oh God, Richie Rich was horrible. Oh, it was so bad. But Blank Check has to be one of the dumbest plots of all fucking time. We're like, so this kid just basically commits fraud and gets away with it for like an extended amount of time and is living in this mansion and like no adult catches on and he doesn't go to prison at the end. Really?
It's a child's capitalist fantasy.
Oh my God. It's so like, obviously it's for kids, but I'm like, man, the dumb shit that somebody was like, yeah, this will make a great fucking movie. This dumbass story right here, let's funnel a bunch of money into it. It's like, oh. There's just been too many really dumb movies being made where it's like Biodome. How did that shit get made?
Biodome.
Or the Carrot Top. I can't remember the name
No,
of
it
it.
was,
Carrot Top had a movie.
I'm still surprised Pauly Shore was able to make movies at all. Like him.
Whatever happened to Chris Kattan?
Mm-hmm.
He
Chris
probably.
Kattan.
I imagine that guy has like severe nerve damage in his neck from all those Night at the Roxbury skits and that
Oh
movie they
God.
made.
Yeah.
Like there's no way that anyone can do that many times without having severe problems. Like and he and Will Ferrell did that shit pretty hard. I mean, they didn't like they were not playing when they did those roles. They were like being real serious about it. I mean, they made a point of how serious it was in that terrible movie when he was doing it and broke the window. Like,
Yeah.
yeah, it's interesting, man. I've always thought Will Ferrell was funny when he was working with other people, and but he's just never been like the leading man. And so even in movies where he's like the main character, like Ron Burgundy, which I did enjoy that movie. I still felt like it's like without the other person in the scene with him, he just wouldn't have it. And the few times where he's had to carry the screen, the composition on his own, it always seems like, it's always waiting for something. And I think he's like best in like buddy movie roles where he's not the only person in the scene.
Right.
Like Ricky Bobby.
Like Ricky Bobby or Blades of Glory or whatever. Or,
Well, I think, yeah, because not even necessarily always the same person.
Yeah, like he's really good with Mark Wahlberg in those Daddy's Home movies. They can play off each other really well, but and you can tell that they spend time with each other and they've got really good rapport. But Mark Wahlberg can carry the screen on his own.
Yeah, well, and that's where I think what you're saying is definitely accurate. Which is why when he tried to do that serious movie, it just didn't work. I like started to watch it, and then it was like
You kept falling asleep, right?
Yeah,
I
just turned it off.
It's that one with Emma Thompson, and she's a writer, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, the movie's so bad.
I tried to watch that movie like 3 or 4 or 5 times, and I think I've seen all of it, but I've never actually watched all of it at the same time. And I've tried to. I don't remember. I don't know how it ends. I've never actually seen the whole thing. Maybe I probably have. I can't tell. I don't know, and I don't want to know at this point because I've tried to watch it and I kept falling asleep. Like no movie that puts me to sleep. Well, actually, you know what? I might actually need a copy of it because if I need to fall asleep quickly, that might come in really handy. But in no way do I have any desire to sit through that entire terrible ass movie. Actually, no, that's not true. I would like to see him get hit by the bus again. That was the best part of the movie. It's the only part I remember.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm like, man, I really wanted to like it, but it's just not good.
Yeah. Well, it's a shame because he's a very talented person. He's funny. He's very with it. Like when he's on screen with somebody else, and live when he did that drum off with the drummer from Red Hot Chili Peppers. He was able to hold his own in the face of an actual rock star, and that's cool. That means he's got something. But for whatever reason, and unlike Tom Hanks, who can transition between comedic role and a dramatic role really fluidly, Will Ferrell just didn't have that. I guess it's not really fair to compare anyone to Tom Hanks. He's like one of those golden actors who seems to be doing everything right.
Yeah. There's only one Tom Hanks. But I think that's also kind of there seems to be an incessant push to always find the next person to fill a big person's shoes that never actually occurs in that manner, and it's only something that can occur organically. And it's like it doesn't even happen in the way one would assume, because it's like okay, let's say we look at Mariah Carey. There's never been another Mariah Carey. Celine Dion came along and did her own thing.
And she's
And
awesome,
people were
too.
right. Well, people were comparing them at first, but then she became her own thing. And then there was never another Celine Dion. So it's like, then Adele came along, and it's like people compare her to like Whitney Houston or like either one of the people I previously mentioned. But then she started to carve out her own niche, and now it's like you can't really put her in any other class because now it's her own thing. And it's like people will perpetually try to put people into other shadows until they carve their own way out, which is like, it seems obvious at first, but then you're like, what is it like the same thing as people who want to mark first on a YouTube comment? And it's like, I just want to tell people I was listening to Adele before everybody else. And I was like, I told everybody she would be like the next Mariah Carey or the next whatever. Because otherwise I can't. It's like most people aren't operating record companies, so I'm not able to like hand out a record deal. So I'm not fucking Barry Gordy. What difference is it to me if I figure out the next big person? Like what does that gratification, is that gratification enough just to keep people doing that? And it seems like, yeah, but at the same time, then it's like, does that inherently limit our capacity to actually experience anything novel? Because everybody's constantly trying to look for something that is imitating the big thing.
Whitney Houston's like a legacy, though. I mean, she sang backup for Dionne Warwick.
Right, which is where
That's like a
that's
huge
just
that's
another
a huge
example
shadow to step out of.
Exactly, but she managed to, and even like Diana Ross, it was like both of those shadows were something she was in at the time, but she managed to step out of. And I'm sure that contributed to her drug use in a sense of like, there was probably some
And Bobby
imposter syndrome. Oh, of course, Bobby. But I mean, like, there's no person that's going to convince a person to do that amount of drugs unless there's something there that is going to make them susceptible to it. So it's like she must have had some imposter syndrome or something that then allowed Bobby to feed her drugs as if it was like compensating for that hole she was feeling or whatever. Because that's what I'm like, something created it. I don't think Bobby did it on his own. And that's where I'm like, this is definitely not absolving him of responsibility so much as like, I just don't think she would have done it if there wasn't some sort of like vulnerability already there for him to like exploit. I can only assume, as I don't know them personally.
Yeah. Well, speaking of other tragic events in the past, Trayvon Martin would have been 27 today.
Then it's like, what is it? Amir Locke just got killed.
Yeah,
What was his name?
I think so.
That's like fucking 4 days ago. And that's where that shit is still happening. This shit is still happening. A no-knock warrant on a person who wasn't the person they were looking for, who was a legal gun owner, who got killed because he happened to move when the cops broke into the apartment without any warning. So that's where I'm like, that shit is still happening.
Daniel, you said something earlier about how the circumstances were a result of a lack of follow through on the address or something like that. Like the previous tenant was the one who issued the threat to police?
So it was either a previous tenant or somebody who was living in the same apartment had been indicated to be a threat to the police in some way. But the failure, one of the failures of the situation was that the police didn't verify who they were interacting with in that way. And they basically just knocked the door down, came in with their guns out, flashing their flashlights, and started kicking the couch that Amir was just sleeping on under a blanket. And, things escalated because Amir was, feeling like his life was under threat, and they shot him.
Yeah, I'm gonna say pre-crime is not a. It's not gonna happen.
His name wasn't even on the warrant.
Pre-crime
His name wasn't even on
whatever
the warrant.
pre-crime division is deciding that these kinds of tactics are good strategies. They need to be put on desk duty. Like not even good desk duty. Like translating, doing data entry desk duty.
And the fact that his name wasn't on the warrant and they still treated him that way, that has nothing to do with it. Even if his name was on the warrant, that shouldn't have been the way it went down.
Yep.
Even if his name had been on the warrant, the way that they did it, just everything about it just speaks to the flaws within the system itself.
The reason we're supposed to be a country with a legal system worth having pride in is that even the guilty are meant to have a day in court, not have execution on the spot before they even have a chance to stand trial. That's what's supposed to set us apart. So when people are getting executed before they even have a chance to go to trial, let alone the not even the person they're looking for, that's where I'm like, what do I have to do as a black person to get people who want me to care about, like, stopping America from getting, I don't know what they want us to do about Ukraine, actually. I don't know if they want us to send troops or not send troops or what, because, like, suddenly the left getting concerned with Ukraine, even though this shit's been going on since, like, 2014, realistically. Like, let's keep it real. Russia's been fucking antagonizing Ukraine by doing this shit off and on since 2014. This didn't just fucking start. So anybody who didn't understand that this shit's been going on for like 7 years wants to suddenly give a fuck about Crimea while Amir Locke just got fucking killed, please explain to me where the fuck they were in 2014 when Russia started doing this shit. Because this shit has been going on off and on since, like I said, since 2014. So this shit didn't just start. And I don't understand why suddenly people on the left are more concerned with this than, like, Joe Rogan, who is an American with a lot of influence over young Americans who are very susceptible to falling into systematic racist thoughts. Why we're suddenly supposed to be more concerned with Ukraine and Crimea than this, which is where I'm like, what the fuck am I supposed to do? What am I supposed to do about Ukraine? It's not even a vote. Like, we're not even in a voting cycle right now. So, like, what the fuck am I supposed to do? You know what I mean? And I'm obviously not asking you two to answer that question, like, because there's no real logical answer. But it's like this weird, like, finally somebody is near being held accountable, and suddenly we're like, no, we need to go fucking save Ukraine now. Even though Amir Locke just got murdered by this fucking, like, Judge Dredd death force that we call cops in America, that I don't know.
Exceptional Radio.
Exceptional Randos show is produced live in Sunroom Studios' Bass Capsule and in partnership with KLST 103.5, RadioCallisti.org. Remember to catch our Exceptional Randos live stream on YouTube every Sunday between 2 and 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And if you have a story, idea, or question that you would like to share, we want to hear from you. Thanks for listening.
Well, that was random. Exceptional Radio.
Good stuff, guys.
Yeah, definitely.